welcome to another edition of Consensus on Reality. Happy New Year.
2024.
That's right. We're out of the Discordian year.
Another year. Oh, man. Yeah, nothing. It kind of was a weird year.
It was a weird year for sure. A lot of Ufologicks last year.
Yeah.
Actually, I don't know if there were Ufologicks in the Kenneth Grantian sense that we'll be talking about tonight. It was more like ufological content.
Boring, dumb stuff. But it was a big year for UFOs, wasn't it? I wonder if this year will be. This year appears to so far be a big year for subterranean happenings.
Right. Hollow Earth is making a comeback.
Well, in a way. Ufologics, yeah. I thought... So I guess we're both kind of looking through Outer Gateways by Kenneth Grant.
That's true.
And that is a weird book.
Yeah.
I'm liking it.
Yeah, I love it. We should start with a little intro here. Yes, Happy New Year. This is our first episode of 2024, and we are...
I gathered that.
What?
I gathered that from,
Who's they?
Oh, the listener.
Okay.
First episode of the year, I guess. Actually, we had a pretty productive 2023.
Mm-hmm. Especially towards the tail end. We got our interview game back on. We are currently making plans to be even more productive in 2024. So if you're not a Patreon member, join up for just $5 a month. Gain access to our full episode archive, written content, tons of exclusive episodes, which we regularly release. You'll get extended cuts on the interviews. And we're looking towards adding even more stuff as this year progresses. We just pulled some topic suggestions from our second tier, which is $10 a month. So check that out at patreon.com/consensusunreality. It's where we do most of our business. There's also some exclusive merchandise, discounted merch, all kinds of stuff over
And
there.
the Discord.
And the Discord server. Absolutely.
That's a big draw for the Patreon, I think. It's pretty fun. I spend a lot of time on there. Just talking to people. It's kind of like a cool little place to hang out. And I finally kind of understand the app. So it's kind of fun to kind of add new channels and, do weird little things. And that kind of is like where you can check out our sort of behind the scenes thought processes, kind of where the show is headed, that kind of thing. So that's, if you like seeing the sausage being made.
Nice. Alluring analogy there.
Yeah, it's a classic analogy. Okay, how about the croissant being made?
Yeah, or if you want to see the Ufonauts making the pancakes.
That's good.
Yeah. Also, there's a cool channel on there where people talk about their strange synchronous events and things like that. And we'll be talking about some Jungian synchronicity stuff tonight as well. So yeah, hop on there, check that out. This episode will probably have a public portion, and then we will carry on the back end for a bit, which will be a Patreon exclusive. So let's get into the episode, Ben. A lot went into this one. I think it's kind of going to be all over the place in the way that we traditionally love to do.
Yeah.
Let's talk about some of the things we looked at.
Let's see. As far as I'm concerned, the big thing I've been looking at is Lewis Hyde's Trickster Makes This World, which is a book I it's one of those books I kind of read like a while ago when I was first getting into stuff, because it was often mentioned as like one of the classics in the field of like sort of applying mythology to contemporary life. And so now I'm really reading it straight through, and It's really fascinating. It's not like a trickster book in the way that like George P. Hansen's book is, or the kind of trickster as we kind of talk about it often on the show as a thing that manifests in the paranormal or like kind of like almost as intelligence. It's very much about the trickster as a mythological figure that appears and what those particular myths say and how they might impact the generation of culture. His thesis is that like the trickster is kind of what produces change in culture and like sort of pivots, especially in art and yeah, generally like culture as a term referring to like the arts and sort of what's I guess culture is the word that I'm looking for. The things about a society that are specific to it, I guess. And so that was the first major thing I've been looking at. Also, it's been a pretty serious season of me like gathering bizarre UFO books, some of which for the shop to sell. That is Apport used books, and some of which are going into the old personal collection. I've just been looking at this crazy, it's a Borderland Sciences publication, which was this really excellent California-based Fortean or kind of paranormal publisher, kind of all throughout the second half of the 20th century, as far as I know. But it's called M.K. Jessup, The Allende Letters and Gravity. And it is bizarre. And I was just looking at it before, and I immediately messaged, when I found this, I immediately messaged a patron and friend of ours, friend of the pod, we could say maybe, Nick, whose magazine is From Great Heights. He's on Instagram. He's a really dedicated sort of UFO collector and sleuth, but he's kind of been piecing this whole Carl Allen, Philadelphia experiment, Carlos Allende, this whole kind of thing. He's been really working on it. And so in this book, this Borderland Sciences book, I came across these marginal notes, which Nick, he sent me a comparison of Carl Allen's handwriting. But there's this blue ink notation in the margins here. My gut said it's not him, but it's really bizarre. So at the bottom of page 47 of this book, the quote says, and I think it's supposed to be written from the perspective of Jessup. It says, so he writes a one, like sort of a footnote after the phrase, "A most beautiful country then met my view." This is about a person who claims to have landed on Venus. And so the footnote that this person hand wrote in says, I must admit it was a bit warm, about 900 degrees Fahrenheit. The atmosphere a bit crushing, and the sulfuric acid CO2 atmosphere, much like my last breaths on Earth. So I think he's like pretending to be like the ghost of Morris Jessup,
right,
who died of inhalation. And so that's like a kind of a scary little thing to have in the margins. And the book is full of like mostly just like lines in the margins highlighting certain phrases, and he writes archons in the periphery of one, the margin. So there's like all these, it's two major weird little notations. The handwriting is like, I'm not a handwriting analyst. I would say that I would be surprised if it was Carl Allen who wrote these. But on the other hand, I don't know. It's a really strange little thing. And so I've been getting these from a eBay dealer and also stumbled upon a few other things, an uncorrected proof of the Jessup dimension. I think someone like liquidated a UFO archive, and this sort of antiques dealer got the archive. And so it's been Yeah, some really strange things have passed through my hands over the last few months, including, and I really just found out about these weird marginal notes in this. I'll send you a picture of it. Maybe I'll post it in the Discord too.
Yeah,
But
there's a really funny sync too, as I posted in the Discord earlier. Just a small image from my notes for this episode, and I was doing some image generation with that Bing AI image
yeah,
generator. And one of the images, the first image that I have in my notes is a jester with his hands on the world. And you just
yeah.
mentioned the book Trickster Makes This World, which is just kind of a funny little
Oh, that is
unconnected
weird.
sync there that like, because our new kind of one of the things we've been kicking around is bringing some different things to the episode and not fully disclosing everything that we've been looking at and just kind of seeing where the conversation goes. But yeah, that's a really kind of funny sync there, especially since that's the first thing you brought up and it's the first thing on my notes.
Yeah, so I guess that's like it fits into the puzzle, whatever, like the jigsaw of the episode.
Yeah.
Um,
So yeah. So I guess I'll mention a couple of the things that I've been looking at, and obviously we'll get more into depth about these things. But that reminds me of a phrase that comes up a lot in John Keel's Operation Trojan Horse, the seminal ufological study that he released. And one of the things he mentions often in that book is victims of the artifact. So he's kind of talking about the transmogrification of strange artifacts from ufological events,
mm,
and kind of the trickstery elements of them. One of those being the Simonton event where the ufonauts made pancakes, which one of
yeah.
them ended up in the hands of J. Allen Hynek. And Simonton, I think, donated the other one to a UFO researcher. And they were kind of just these weird, flat, cornstarchy pancakes. I think we'll talk a little bit more about that specific case later, too, and how it relates to some things. But the reason I actually arrived at going through Operation Trojan Horse again is because I saw something with Gary Nolan, who is a big figure in the American Cosmic Nexus. He is one of the main characters of study in that book, and he is referred to as a pseudonym in that novel. I think he's James, right? James is his pseudonym at the time, and then it came out that he disclosed his actual name and stuff like that, and now he's involved in
Yeah.
this Soul Foundation,
Yeah.
which is this new think tank for UAP related phenomena that David Grush is involved in, and some other characters. Jake Stratton, right, is the Skinwalkers at the Pentagon chap. It's funny, we can like never remember his name.
Yeah.
It's almost this like
Someone
blurry
is
object.
there's Lukatsky is one of them too.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, the names are tough with for some reason they're like yeah, they're like redacted.
Some of them aren't very like sticky, they just like kind of like
Yeah.
are vaporous names.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a part of it too, which kind of strangely relates to elements of what's talked about in Operation Trojan Horse. But yeah, I guess it's crazy because Gary Nolan is like this biomedical developer, and he recommends Operation Trojan Horse, that it be read. And I found this to be strange. A weird anecdote of the way the conversation is taking shape these days. So yeah, I looked into that, but before that, I was reading Outer Gateways by Kenneth Grant, which is basically his, taking the Typhonian current type of writings that are extended in his trilogies, and this book specifically is about how it relates to the ufological, and what he says in there a lot is ufologics, which is like kind of a term for the weird emanations of UFO related events and phenomena.
I think he's kind of like portmanteauing it with magic, and like it's kind of like this. He's trying to kind of claim ufology as like something that falls under the wings of his brand of whatever Typhonian sort of magic, and the Crowley tradition through Grant is like he's very good at this thing where he absorbs other things that are happening in culture, the way he absorbs Lovecraft and sort of transforms Lovecraft into something that fits in perfectly with Crowley, and then UFOs as something that fits in with Lovecraft with Crowley. Like he kind of is like this this sort of blob that absorbs these different currents, I guess you would call them, and it makes for such fascinating reading. Yeah, especially this one.
Yeah, it's well, he's like he's kind of an alchemist of literature, and I mean that he takes things that to many exist in fiction or history or anthropology, and he transmutes them into this like all-encompassing grimoire that relates to what he views as the Typhonian current, or double current, I suppose. But it's actually some of his books are criticized for their lack of lucidity, but this one I feel like actually brings up some really interesting things, and there's some really interesting wordplay too, where if you kind of look at certain sentences, they almost have like a that James Joyce effect of being like a metascript, or a hypertext.
Yeah, he has a really unique style, and I feel like, of course, I'm going to say this, but sometimes he does kind of remind me of like Mazer Story, like with the way he'll make these logical leaps that are almost alien to like anyone but him, but then which kind of like his whole argument hinges upon like just these very subtle things that he kind of hangs his hat on, which I am impressed by, as just I love that kind of stuff. So it doesn't bother me, but I can see why people would read this and be like, this is like your argument. You're saying that because this word is this number, like in gematria or something, like, which, I mean, it produced like a body of work that is unique. So, yeah.
Singular almost. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
But I find a new way of looking at Grant stuff and how it relates to a lot of what Carl Jung was writing about and doing. Kind of makes a lot of it stand on a little bit more ground, I suppose. And there's an interesting conjunction there too with the kind of active imaginal work that Jung was doing in composing the black books that would become the Red Book, and a few of the other posthumous releases. I think 7 Sermons to the Dead is included in that as well. But this, I think he called it his nocturnal workings, in that it related to this like hypnagogic semi-dream state. But yeah, there's this interesting concept there of what Jung called the psychoid, and I think this was something he was developing later in his work, considering that which cannot be directly perceived or represented. So in this way, the archetype is almost like the refracting image on a pond, and the psychoid is the actual image that is being reflected upon the pond.
The psychoid stuff is so confused. I think it's even confusing to Jungians.
Yeah. Well,
I was looking at it, and it seems like it's where the mind sort of slowly fades into the body. So like where psyche meets soma is kind of how I was beginning to understand it. And it sort of is in this sort of cast of these archetypes that he came up with, but it's like the least like fashionable one, kind of like for people to talk about, because it's so, but it's so hard to talk about. It's this kind of
it's straight up, it's metaphysical, which like is
right.
the reason it wasn't as well adopted with a lot of, straightforward Jungians, if there are them, I guess, but they, kind of took more to like more tactile things like the archetype and some of the other terms, the collective unconscious, obviously. But
I think like I always forget that there's this, one of the big parts about archetypes is that you're not like able to ever truly experience them, like that they're only things that are expressed through your life, kind of. They're these weird tension objects that are expressed through your actions and through the larger shape of your life. And I feel like we kind of think of archetypes as these almost possessing thing, like we're possessed by an archetype, as if it's like an entity that has a will. And I don't know if that's, as far as what from what I can tell, I don't know if that's what Jung thought of them as. I just feel like it's very common for people to talk about, like, you're really embodying the trickster archetype right now, when it's not so much. I don't know. It's looking into this psychoid thing. It kind of reintroduced me to the way that the archetype conversation is way more subtle and nuanced than most interpretations that are popular. And like ones that I kind of, look at. It's more of a subtle thing than that, I guess.
Well, for him, I think the archetype is the vessel in which the psychoid inhabits, and the psychoid is kind of this like essential experience, and it has that element of being a kind of abyssal threshold, or these kind of like dwellers on the threshold that we talk about, like the archetype of the Abraxian, or some of the more complex things in Gnosticism, like that are kind of unclear, but like the Barbelo and these states where different levels of consciousness or energy are being transitioned into other levels. So I think the psychoid is kind of where the collective and the self have this crossing of the abyss or something like that, which is real. I think considering all of this with Ufologicks, it's pretty fun, and it's one of those viewpoints that we can look at the phenomena and the stories that are talked about in something like Operation Trojan Horse. I also have in front of me here Flying Saucer Occupants, just a really great little paperback by Coral and Jim Lorenzen. And it's just all case studies of strange ufonaut encounters.
That's a great book. I love that book.
Yeah, for sure. So
it's like, I love humanoid and like, encounter tales from that era. Before we move on, I think it was weird when you mentioned you were kind of looking into this Jung stuff, because I've been very slowly paging through Peter Kingsley's book Catafalque, which is his book subtitled Carl Jung and the End of Humanity. I got it for Christmas, and it's kind of he's yeah, he's sort of this weird combination of mystic and scholar that is sort of unique. He's very controversial among Jungians for this book. Because he's kind of attacking them the whole book, saying that Jung was misinterpreted for forever, and that this is the true interpretation of Jung. And it's like this very personal book too. So it's kind of a strange read, but I'm really enjoying it. It's a little bit like Western civilization has fallen kind of stuff, which I find a little, heavy-handed sometimes. But I still think it's an interesting look at Jung. Yeah.
Is it kind of like that Adam Curtis type of talk about, the post-truth society, like coinciding with
not really
collapsing civilization?
I mean, yeah, that's in it, but it's much more mystical, and I think one of his books before this was about I'm blanking on his name, but one of the great Sufi scholars. So he's kind of coming from this very personal, like mystical kind of angle, as opposed to a more political, historical angle. And I think he's talking about that there's a tradition that we've lost kind of in these things, and that Jung was kind of a representative of this sort of mystical current, that kind of stuff. But it's a big book. It's like the paperback is like 900 pages.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like there's that whole Passport to Magonia thing kind of fits this psychoidal lens a lot as well, because you kind of have this constantly changing face of the phenomena, right? You have like fairy lore and the ecstatic religious experiences from history that have kind of been with us since the dawn of man, or the birth of civilization, or I don't know, as far back as our recorded history goes, right?
Yeah.
And it's strange because even in the past 100 years, like Keel talks about in Operation Trojan Horse, the airship encounters in the late 1800s, the airship wave, which I think some people kind of reduced to yellow journalism and stuff, but apparently there was a ton of sightings in different places being reported, and by people, I don't know, like, does this even matter? But it was reported by people like within the United States government and stuff like that, like people that were supposed to, or that we at least at one time looked at as being, rational, sound-minded people who wouldn't jeopardize their lives and careers to say something absurd. I think things have kind of shifted on that, but
things have changed.
It's interesting how he talks about it, though, because there's this paradigm of, the phenomena interacting with humans under the guise of this religious control system for, a very long time, and different
control system.
Sure.
That's the word of the day.
Is it?
Yeah. Rest in peace, Pee Wee Herman, word of the day.
Nice. You got a Herman Slickback going on right now. Viewers can't see that, but yeah. Now they're just going to imagine you in like a Pee Wee Herman suit riding around on a little bicycle. But
yeah, I would do that. I wouldn't.
Yeah. I mean,
I don't know.
Well, it's just because it's funny that like this idea that you have this, the face of this phenomena for so long being these religious ecstatic things, where there be angels and demons and in some places fairies. But then it kind of test kits this new outer space lens with the airships thing, and it's kind of like
Yeah.
steamy with like there's all these sightings that Keel writes about, that probably coming from like Charles Fort and things like that, just kind of weird newspaper periodical things of the late 1800s of flying ships with anchors and things like that. That doesn't make any sense at all,
Yeah.
So there's this like absurdity that's like test kitting this new face, and then it kind of like it tweaks it a little bit where it comes back as like the flying saucer, and now we kind of even have it as more of like this even like the futurism of it is shifting more to like that Magritte orb, of the tic tac, and the sleekness of the hyper object, that changing, phasing silver.
And it's kind of, I mean, I feel like we've talked about this so many times on the show, but it's feeding back into what people fake about it. It takes on some of the characteristics of the hoaxes that claim to be it, sort of. And then there's the way that light plays into it. There's always this talk of light, which I'm always kind of fascinated by, this idea that they are lights. Like people still call them lights in the sky, or orbs sometimes even, which kind of links it into like the ghost phenomena. So there's this weird gray area between these different types of paranormal encounters where on the one hand, people are seeing objects in the sky that seem to be metal, or they seem to be, going back to the airships, they're objects that seem to be vessels constructed for the purpose of travel. Whereas sometimes they're like not really necessarily even objects. They're, well, now being described as phenomena. Like, and I guess they were, even going back to going back to Jim and Coral, Lorenzen, Aerial Phenomenon Research Office. So I guess it conjures this idea of like what's an object,
oh my god, that's so
a phenomenon.
I just made the connection too, that those letters from Jung were just released to Appro, and he's writing to Coral. He like mistakes Coral as a gentleman at first, and then corrects it in one of the other. That's an even funnier sync. But yeah,
Jung is walking around.
And I don't want to discount, obviously, like there's the, the political conspiracy element of this, that,
sure,
it's not to say that we don't obviously recognize that. I think that we just talk about the phenomena from a lot of, we study different lenses to look at the thing, I guess. So obviously that, whatever's happening is kind of used and manipulated for different objectives by just, people all of the time, and the hoaxing and stuff as well. But it's interesting in Operation Trojan Horse, Keel kind of takes the opinion that, the deception is on the behalf of the phenomena, and not really on the behalf of any kind of like power conglomerate of people.
That's kind of where Strieber ends up in that new book, Them, too. Like that, the visitors, the phenomenon, I guess, that itself is almost using government secret projects or psyops from like an even higher level. So it's like it's this weird back and forth puppet master thing where it's like every time you look at who's holding the strings of the UFO, above them is the same thing holding the strings again. So it's intelligence operations, but then above that is the aliens, but then above that's intelligence operations, and then above that's the aliens again. And I guess it's just going to keep going like that. So yeah, I think that I'm perfectly comfortable talking about it as a metaphysical or spiritual or unknown event, as much as I'm comfortable talking about it as, which it very much is, like a way to manipulate or I guess program the cultural, the scope of what's possible within a culture, I think is what it does. It's setting certain bounds in what our culture is able to imagine is, I think, one of its functions. Yeah.
We hit record on the Zoom just to back up there, by the way.
Are you not recording?
No, I am. I just
recording in progress.
Got it.
Yeah.
Feeding the AI here, but yeah, I mean, and you mentioned the light thing too. This is something that Keel talks about in Operation Trojan Horse, but he also expands upon in the Eighth Tower. And it's really this idea that the phenomena is coming from a higher dimension, and that the way that it takes shape is the transition into the lower dimension through the manipulation of light. And there's this whole thing with the seven lights, Roy G. Biv and the seven sisters of the Pleiades being this constant current in religions. You have the importance of the number seven in, Judeo-Christian traditions. And even there's also the light code stuff of a lot of current channelers.
Like downloads.
Yes. And it's kind of an interesting thing too, because, a lot of this had me revisiting thoughts about Encounters, the Diana Pasulka book that came out recently that we talked about just a couple episodes ago. And if Gary Nolan is somebody who I think he's interacted or has possibly claimed to have interacted with the phenomena for his entire life, and has studied other people who have interacted with the phenomena their entire lives. If he's recommending Operation Trojan Horse, which posits that there is this agenda behind the trickster-y absurdity of ufological encounters, then what does that mean for these people that are mentioned in Encounters and other people that are mentioned in American Cosmic, who exist within both the military industrial complex and the intelligence community, who are apparently receiving downloads from non-human intelligence? Do those downloads then, in some abstract way feed some kind of ultimate objective, or even, an invasion, an invasion that's supposed to take a very long time. So that's kind of what Keel talks about, is that ultimately this could be some kind of like quiet invasion that doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen on the White House lawn, but it's supposed to occur over, a very long period of time that maybe is not a long period of time for the phenomena that is interacting.
This kind of made me just think of something. I've been reading this Trickster Makes This World, and I've been trying to think about the UFO thing as in some way a manifestation of some mythological trickster thing in some way. At least that's part of it, maybe. And that's not an uncommon thought, among certain people. But reading this book and looking at these trickster myths, there's this aspect of the trickster that is foolish. Like the trickster is at once clever, like very clever, but then also very easily overcome by like lust or just inclined to do stupid things for the sake of pride, or just like to flout the rules or something. Or I don't know if that's the right word, but to sort of just to show that he doesn't have to do something just because someone says that he should. And so there's this, Wile E. Coyote is very much based on the coyote myths of the native peoples, Coyote the Trickster. And so there, obviously there's a foolishness about that. But But so the UFO is trickster. I feel like where is the foolishness in like the UFO thing? Where is the jester-ish aspect of the UFO? Where is the propensity to like fail because it was sort of tricked by its own hubris? And I feel like that might be a weirdly an explanation or like a solution to the problem of why would they fly here and then crash? Like the whole like the UFO crash thing. It's like, well, the trickster seeds culture throughout. By his mistakes, he's often used as the reasoning behind certain aspects of human culture or certain limitations placed on humanity, because of like a mistake he made or like something he did. And so it's kind of interesting to think of the like hubris of the UFOnauts, like crashing their UFO here, seeding some sort of technology in this way that fits very nicely with the trickster stories,
Yeah, because that's the point that's like brought up so often with the David Grush thing, is the absurdity that these flying saucer occupants would travel across galaxies and come here to study humans, and then they would crash land like on I-95 or something. But yeah, I was thinking about that as well, that if there are these quote unquote crash retrieval programs or biologics, these things would have been seeded intentionally.
Right. Or like they're not even real. Like, or I mean, it's kind of hard to at least wrap my mind around. Like they're not really aliens. They're like this weird manifestation of a mythology or something. Like they're
Apports.
Yeah, right. They're
no, it's like that's the thing too, is the UFO is a literal apport, in that so often they disappear and they evaporate and they're here for this short period of time.
Yeah, and like it feels like maybe someone like warned them like not to go to Earth and like mess with this, like in like the classic Star Trek sense or whatever, but maybe something different than that. And then they decided, well, we're going to do it anyway. And then, oh no, they crashed, and that's like what created humanity or something. That's like so much of what the trickster myths are like. Is there's the book starts with the author's writing with these like native guys that picked him up when he was hitchhiking, and one of them starts telling him this coyote story where I forget who it is, but someone tells the coyote, or the coyote sees somebody throwing his eyes into a tree and leaving them like for a while, and he was like, I want to know how to do that. And so the guy was like, okay, I'll teach you how to do it, but you can't do it more than 4 times in one day or they won't come back, because the eyes would fly back when he tells them to come back. And so of course the coyote does it 4 times, and then so the eyes don't come back. And so this is like both at the same time like an explanation of why the coyotes have these certain types of eyes. I forget exactly how it goes. And I guess I shouldn't even be telling this story, because part of the story of that story is that trickster tales are like, I guess they're almost like objects or something that are brought out in a certain time for a certain purpose. They're used intentionally. So, but I mean, he put it in the book, so it's not my fault. But yeah, just this hubris, or like this idea that boundaries don't matter to to this figure, and so they will always cross the boundary if one is set there, because that's where they thrive, is sort of debating where the boundary lies. And something like, I feel like there's something about that to the UFO thing, about boundaries, but also I don't want to say liminality, but I guess you have to, like something coming in from outside.
Yeah, for sure.
So something like from outside the circles of time,
yeah. From the outer gateways,
like something coming in. Yeah, and so there is a tricksteriness to that, something that comes from elsewhere. Because if there's a boundary, somebody or something set that boundary for a reason, and crossing it is sort of an act of,
it's
denial.
Night side.
Yeah,
It's like a nightside taboo.
right. Yeah, it's a taboo breaking to I don't know, like yeah.
There's
It's interesting to look at it from this though, from this angle.
for sure. I think it's actually a really healthy angle to approach. Um, and you
Yeah.
know when you look at the idea of the psychoid as well, um, I've heard it described as being the event, beyond the event horizon of the mind of the self. So
Hmm.
within that, Jung said that synchronicity is the principle of the unique cases that compose the whole of reality. So if the psychoid exists at the mouth of the black hole, then when you get closer to the event horizon, like we imagine with black holes, the supposed stretching of space and time, you kind of get that hyper state of synchronicity as you're approaching
Hmm.
the archetype. So there is this kind of like this strange closeness to like the deterministic like events that created the universe existing in synchronicity, and that when you get closer to this like phenomenal state of the psychoid, there is this kind of like ramping up of synchronicity and stuff like that. Um, so
Huh.
yeah, I mean, I think we could expand upon that, but I hate to
I
cut it
don't know.
short,
Can we?
but under the yeah, can we? I don't know, can we next time? I think we'll hop over to Patreon now. So this is a good time to check out patreon.com/consensusunreality for just $5 a month. Tons and tons of exclusive stuff over there. It's where we do most of our work. So check that out, and we're going to continue on after the short break.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Wow, that was a really long break.
Yeah. It was crazy. It wasn't even short. It was a
I
long break.
I took a new lease on life during that break. Now I think that uh AI is good.
Yeah. Like, there's kind of a funny thing with the Grush thing too, and the crash retrieval and quote unquote biologics, and obviously like the artifacts that are left in fairy lore and stuff like that.